This episode of the BREWtally Speaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give
up. You already know what it is when you hear that. It's another episode of the BREWtally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John. This episode's guest is James from Cage Fight and Tesseract. I was really excited about this. Tesseract is one of those bands that obviously, if you're in kind of the prog metal world, tech metal world, you're very aware of who Tesseract is at this point, you know, with the long career that they've had at this point. But Cage Fight, now that's the band that when I first heard the first couple of songs of when they were kind of coming out as a quote-unquote new band, I was really amped on this. It has a lot of the old East Coast hardcore that I love and grew up with. And it's one of those that when this came in my email inbox, I was so excited to hear this record, and it does not let you down. It just came out probably about a few weeks ago as of right now when I'm recording this, and it's punishing. It's a great fucking record start to finish. And it's one of those where, you know, it's funny to say, like, I'm excited about a new band, even though the pedigree of the band isn't new. It's something I kind of talk about where sometimes listening to music and doing this podcast has kind of made me not enjoy new music. But this was one where I just was so excited when it came in my email inbox, like I was saying, and man, it just lived up to the hype to me. And I think that that's so hard to do, especially, I'd almost say I don't know what's harder, being in a brand new band and actually, you know, living up to the hype of a song or two and getting that buzz of like everyone being like, yo, have you checked out this fucking band? Or you know, kind of the route that James and everyone went, where it's like you have people who you know put out great music, and you hear a song and you're like, okay, this is dope. Is the whole thing going to live up to this? So I actually don't know if I feel like it's harder to be one or the other, but in either event, everything fucking crushes on this record, and I was so excited to talk to James, and as you'll hear, we were actually supposed to do a podcast a couple years ago. I had reached out to James when he was doing press for Wes Borland's solo record, the Crystal Machete record. And it was one of those where it didn't happen, but once I kind of realized that who James was, and it was the James I thought it was, I was like, well, dude, like, let's get you on, because like you're a musician, you're in a band, you're also doing press. Like there's so many things that you do that I think it'd just be interesting to talk to you and kind of see how you navigate through all those things. And so we talk about that. We talk about the Cage Fight record. We talk about the music industry, DSWs, and just so many different things. So I'm going to stop blabbing. Let's get into this conversation with James, and I'll talk to you all on the other side of it. That era kind of hardcore, because it's like I had done like a live cast kind of thing about like 2 years ago when the pandemic started, and I had Andrew from the Ghost Inside on, and we were doing like our top new metal, like 5 top new metal songs and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm gonna kind of throw like a curveball at everyone, and I was like, I'm gonna go with Biohazard Punishment. I was like, because as much as they are an East Coast hardcore band, like through and through, there's a little bit of that groove and bounce of like proto new metal that was kind of in their style as well.
Definitely.
And it's one of those. Good.
Yeah, I think on State of the World Dress album, they definitely explored that more with like, I guess, some Cypress Hill in there, and like it definitely veered into this like rap metal kind of territory, but still being hardcore. I'm a massive fan of Biohazard.
Yeah, they're it's so funny, like being from the East Coast originally before moving here in the Midwest of Michigan. It's really interesting just to kind of see like a lot of that, like a band like Biohazard, I think is kind of one of those bands like musicians know and love them, but I don't think they really got the credit they deserve for kind of being pioneers and originators of kind of their sound and kind of the bands they influence from there.
Yeah, I think those who know, but
yeah. Gotta say, it's really awesome to finally get to talk with you. I know many years ago when I had kind of started the podcast, we had talked about you and I were in communication with getting Wes Borland on when you were kind of doing PR stuff. Yeah. And then I was like, well, actually, it'd be really cool to have you on to kind of talk about this duality of your life of, doing press and publicity and stuff like that, but also, being in Tesseract and stuff like that and getting, having that going as well and kind of being in both worlds in different facets. So I'm glad we get to do this and kind of talk a little bit about that, about Cage Fight, which the new record it's really fucking good. I'm glad when I got the email, I was like, holy shit, I've been waiting for this and this is awesome.
Awesome. Amazing.
What so it's funny to me because I know reading quickly in the bio that I got for the album for Cage Fight, it kind of talks about having it be an outlet for a lot of the frustrations and a lot of the, I guess, anger that had kind of built up and was an outlet for that.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
No, you're good. What I find interesting about it though is as I listen to it, and while it still feels new, it has such a sense of nostalgia feeling to me. And I can't quite put my finger on if it's just the production of it or just the attitude that it feels kind of like an East Coast hardcore band, even though it's not.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was a bit of a nostalgia kind of tip for me, really, because I just I guess the anger and the message aside, what I really wanted to do was, I love thrash and I love hardcore. I grew up on all that stuff. Like Biohazard were a massively important band to me as a teenager, along with bands like Strife and Terror, and then Hatebreed. But also I love Slayer. And I love Slayer. But yeah, who does love Slayer? But I kind of just wanted to write loads of stuff in that style, and I've been with Tesseract, been playing in like super low weird tunings for 15 plus years, and I picked up my 6-string and standard tuning, and I was a bit like, oh, this is fun, this takes me back, and yeah, in a way, I guess it's just very much inspired by that era of music.
Because I feel like from a production standpoint, I feel like the thing that is interesting to me when listening to the record is I feel like it almost has this, and I don't want to say like dry guitar tone, but it's not as massive sounding as I feel like a lot of records are now. And I feel like knowing your work in Tesseract and stuff like that and the production quality and all those kind of things in the music, was it kind of hard to kind of find where the sound was going to be of the record, excuse me, especially in guitar tone, or was that something that kind of happened right away and you're like, here it is, and kind of inspiration came from that even?
Yeah, I think it was basically found a solid guitar tone that was like meaty, but also still quite tight. I think one area where it differs a little bit is the guitar tone, because I still went for sort of quite a kind of a not genty, but very kind of like modern tight guitar tone rather than like a big beefy old school guitar tone, which I think works really well with like the thrashy stuff and the faster stuff, because you can really hear the definition and hear all the notes. Like for example, if you listen to like, I don't know, any sort of like old thrash stuff. Like the distinction of like the fast notes can be quite tough. I mean, it's also the recording at the time, whereas the production this time was done with very tight tone and with like kind of a key ear to try and make all that stand out a little bit, I think. But yeah, I mean, there really wasn't much thought put into any of this. It was just like, that tone's good. This riff works. Let's go.
I feel like in a sense, potentially it's kind of, as you were saying, like, picking up a 6-string for the first time, having it be in standard tuning, that, it's funny sometimes when we go back to things, how we first learn them, almost kind of going back to basics, that it's in doing that where a lot of creativity gets brought out, because it's not the normal, even though it's kind of how we all started back at one. And it's always interesting to see how life kind of will remind you of that, even if it's in music or in other facets of your life, how it's like, oh, sometimes going back to the start of where things came from often breeds, creativity in interesting ways.
Absolutely. I think going back to 6-string in standard tuning and also drop D after 15 years, it was exciting because it was nostalgic, but also I'd learned a lot in that 15 years doing loads of other stuff. So suddenly I was like, oh, now I can apply various things that I've learned or thought about to this style of playing. I mean, I guess the style, I very much wanted to go old school, but I think the execution, is what it is because of my, I guess I've been around a long time, doing lots of different things, and it's quite nice to apply what you learn to that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And, I think what's interesting to me is thinking about this, like, I think a lot of musicians write a lot of different things, and, it may not be for their main project, and, you just stockpile songs, riffs, whatever. And what gets interesting to me is where along in the creative process do you start kind of going, I think I have enough to make this be something else. Let's start fleshing this out and seeing what it can become fully. Like, what was that process like for you with Cage Fight?
I think the process, I mean, like, the ideas wasn't the problem. I think it was getting the elements right. I think that was the most tricky part. Because obviously over the pandemic, John, the bass player, and I had been writing stuff, mainly just for fun. We'd get together for some beers, maybe sometimes illegally, if you could say that now in lockdown, and I just play guitar, write riffs, and drink a few too many beers, and then wake up and just go, oh, that was fun. And there was no real kind of plan for it. And we kind of got the bones of 3 songs, the pile of ideas, but it kind of wasn't really going anywhere. There was an element missing, and it wasn't until and we were talking with Nick about maybe coming in and having a drum jam, but obviously had lockdown and it wasn't really possible. But then it kind of went on the back burner because these ideas are fun, but this is just some ideas that came up with over beers as mates. But it was when Rachel joined, then suddenly it was like, right, okay, now what she's brought to the table has suddenly transformed this into something totally different and really exciting, and that basically was the motivation to pick it back up and get going. So I think it wasn't so much, I think that probably was the moment, because and basically from the point when she joined, we pretty much wrote the whole album in 6 months. So it was just like the elements came together and it's like, right, okay, we've got something here, let's run with it.
I always find it funny when things kind of work that way, especially I think when you kind of have success in the career of being a musician, when you have a sustained career like you have, talking about 15 years in Tesseract, it's one of those where sometimes I feel like starting anew almost seems really daunting. But when everything just kind of happens, it almost is like I said, kind of life going, this is kind of where you're supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And everything will just kind of fall into place if you let it.
Yeah, that's kind of what it felt like. I mean, if this was going to be hard work in like a grinding sense, I would never have done it. Because it was only supposed to be a fun project. But then when everything fell together and the 4 of us just gelled and we worked together incredibly well, it was exciting and stuff happened quickly. And it's hard to not run with it when things are working out so well.
What has been speaking to the album cover, I remember when you guys had posted the person that got the tattoo on their palm, Like to have a band that, you know, you only released a few singles at that point, it's like, is it crazy to see the fandom that already exists for this band?
It's quite exciting. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like there's been like lots of like early and people have been really enthusiastic at the beginning. I mean, like the palm tattooist actually wasn't. You know, she didn't know the band or anything about it. The tattooee. I don't know what the correct word is. The person who had the tattoo. But basically, because Rachel is a tattoo artist in her day job, and she came up with the idea, and she basically said, "You know, I'll just I'll do a free tattoo on somebody for a cool project. Everyone wants a free tattoo," and I was like, "Do they really?" Like, I mean, is that? It turns out, yes. Although we had like a number of people say they'd do it and then not show. We actually delayed everything by a month because people kept turning up. But then this one person turned up, and yeah, and it worked out really, really well. I think it's pretty brutal. Like, I mean.
It's the palms are one of the ones I want to get done eventually. Like I have the tops of my hands, but not the palms. But I was impressed with the line work and just how clean it was for a real shit spot of having to get tattooed. But it's almost as iconic, you know, as Slayer, you know, with the what was it? I want to say God Hates Us All, and I know that's not it, but the album cover with the carving in it.
The carving on the arm, yeah. Oh, good. What album is that? I've forgotten. That's a '90s album, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I know the one you mean, though.
Yeah, but it's almost. I feel like, you know, now you're in the pantheon of just kind of iconic album artwork like that of, you know, ultimate fandom coming across in it, and it very much like that Slayer album. It just feels. It feels very visceral because I mean it's one of those, like, I mean, I don't think you have to be tattooed or heavily tattooed at all to understand, like, getting your palm tattooed is just, like you said, it's fucking brutal. It's aggressive. It's just it. I feel like it sets the tone visually for the album before you even hear a single note, and I feel like, especially for a quote unquote newer band, that's so. Sometimes it takes bands a long time, you know, 2, 3, 4 records deep to kind of have that iconic imagery, and you guys have it right away.
Yeah, again, it was just like a real lucky accident. Rachel came up with this idea and we just ran with it, and it's turned out incredibly well. But also, I think you hit the nail on the head with like kind of the visceral kind of feeling, because I think that's what this project for me is all about. Because I mean, I love Tesseract, and you know, it's absolutely massive part of my life. But this is kind of the opposite. Tesseract is very clinical, very calculated. It is emotive, but it's like it's very controlled. Whereas this is the opposite. This is, I mean, visceral is one of the best words to describe. I think it is pure kind of like, you know, thought isn't important. It's just emotion. It's just driving. It's feeling rather than thought. I looked it up. It's divine intervention.
Divine intervention. That's it. I was going to say, I know someone would, like, I was thinking about typing it in, but I was like, I always hate when you can, like, you know, if you watch the video or whatever, like, it looks like I'm not paying attention, and it's like, no, I'm looking something up because I have that ability to do such in real time.
Yeah, sorry, I just did that.
Yeah. You know, it's funny too, you know, kind of talking a little bit more about the record, you know, the way the album ends with a Bitch in the Pit. It's like when I saw that song title before even hearing the song, I was like, the infamous phrase kind of like going to hardcore shows and, you know, seeing really tough, awesome women just, you know, handling their own against their male counterparts and so forth. And I was interested to see lyrically where the song was going to kind of go, especially, you know, being a female fronted band. But it's so interesting to kind of, with what Rachel did, where, and across the record even, but more so on this song, I feel like just kind of really making it feel like something that we've all seen, but putting a unique spin on it to where it still feels like it's making an impactful social commentary and so forth, which I think collectively has been done on this whole record, which is, you know, it's not, I don't want to say it's interesting that it is that way, because I feel like that's like we've been talking about, where it was kind of the impetus of the whole record, but to just kind of touch on something like that, where it's a very centric perspective that maybe a lot of your listenership may not think of or be aware of, I think is really interesting. And to kind of make it the ending track, kind of, I feel like makes it a definitive statement and almost kind of maybe sets up what's to come on, you know, the next batch of songs that you guys will put out eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting choice of track, and I think it works really well because it's a body count cover, and but the lyrics were switched up a little bit to make it more in places first person, where she says "I'm the victim in the pit" and stuff like that. Whereas, but yeah, I thought because we really wanted to do a cover, and that one was the absolute perfect fit, especially for a female vocalist to perform it. And as you say, the message in it's really, really cool. And I quite like it at the end of the album too, because like the track before that's a bit of an epic and goes on a bit of a tangent, and then Bitch in the Pit takes you straight back to the riffs and carnage, and then finish.
Well, I mean, what's interesting too, even with the track listing, is it's at 14 songs, and especially like you said, with My Dreams kind of being more of a kind of an opus, like very big and grandiose. It's like equally you have Cage Fight, which is not even a minute long, and you have some where it kind of goes all over. And I think, like I said, it kind of takes you on a journey and kind of keeps you wondering what's coming next, but still showcases a lot of the influences. Like, I mean, at times I can't remember the song off the top of my head, but there was even kind of like a death metal-y kind of run that you were doing on guitar. I was like, you don't really hear that in this style of music as much, but I think it kind of goes back to what you're saying, sort of like those single notes, like those quick single note kind of runs. But it was interesting to kind of see a lot of different genres kind of peeking through at times. And it's like, oh, there's a little bit of this influence. There's a little bit of that one. But I think it creates a really fun listen from start to finish and leaves you wanting more, to me.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I think the track you were talking about is the track. What's it called? It's always Trevor from the BREWtally doing a guest spot on it. Oh my god, it's gone from memory. I don't know where it's gone. We'll come back to me in a minute. But yeah, that's a little bit more. That's got like blast beats in it because Nick, our drummer, is a big death metal fan, and there isn't too much death metal. It's actually that came out about because we're just like, come on, let's have a section with blast beats, and just Nick loves playing blast beats, and it came out quite well because I guess a lot of it's still quite hardcore. Well, it's almost a bit grindcore, I suppose. It kind of, I don't know. It's I think basically the whole record is a mixture of like loads of our early influences, and ultimately, although there is kind of some serious underlying messages, ultimately it was just a hell of a lot of fun for all of us because it's doing like loads of stuff that we love.
It's funny, I feel like a lot of the hardcore scene and a lot of the metal scene that's kind of gaining prominence, I feel like is a love letter to the bands that everyone grew up on, but not just kind of taking it and being like, well, here's unabashedly the things we're into, but kind of progressing it and taking it forward. You look at a band like End, even though they're kind of more of a super group of sorts, but it's like, what Greg and Will and Jay and Brandon and all them kind of do and bring their own unique flavor to it. Is really inspiring, and kind of seeing how they're able to pay homage to these old bands and these old sounds to a band like Knocked Loose or even Code Orange, where they're kind of doing the same thing but putting their own spin on it, modernizing it. There we go. A bit it's interesting, and as I get older now, almost being 40 myself, it's like it's great to see bands being able to do this, where I can go, oh, I hear this influence, and it reminds me of these bands that I grew up loving and listening to and still do, but kind of being excited about something new, because I feel like as we get older, and especially in rock and metal and stuff like that, I feel like we kind of get jaded and become gatekeepers of sorts, where it's like we're our own worst not critics, but we're our own worst enemies, basically, in the sense that it's like, it seems like once we get a certain age, it's like, well, these are my bands, that's all I listen to, and anything new is shit, and I don't want to give it a shot. And it's like, I love kind of getting excited again about the scene and getting to still see bands like Terror that are still doing it, decades into their career and so forth, and continuing to kind of bring up the new generation of bands that are being influenced by them. And it just feels really good to be excited about heavy music again.
Yeah, totally. And do you know what makes me feel really excited is you mentioned a bunch of young bands that are doing heavy stuff, and it makes me feel really excited and happy that there is still there's a big young scene, like young people are really into it. Because I think what I worry about sometimes is like, maybe younger generations don't want to listen to metal or hardcore, or they might discover something else, but that's definitely not the case. And like there are loads of new bands coming out. Like recently discovered an American band called Gridiron. They're from Pennsylvania, I think, and they're a brand new hardcore band, and they absolutely killer. And yeah, every now and again, brand new, fresh bands pop up. Yeah, in the death metal side, there's a young band called Worm Shepherd. I'm not quite sure where they're from, but they're kind of like a black metal bit crossed with a death metal band, and they're like barely 20. And it just actually makes me feel really, really happy that these, loads of fresh, exciting stuff's coming out, because it means this is all live and well, and we're not going to become we won't all become redundant just yet.
Do you feel that, kind of shifting gears a little bit, do you feel that, and I don't know if I would assume you're still kind of are you still doing like your PR press stuff, or are you kind of, okay.
Oh yeah.
Do you feel that because of, like, I know I get like constantly emails about all these bands that are, whatever, with the 17 paragraphs describing their influences, who they are, where they came from, all that kind of stuff. Do you feel that kind of being on that side of things allows you to kind of be more like finger on the pulse, tapped into things, because you're a part of it in that capacity?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I realized that all the elements were going to get together and work, I guess from my experience, nothing's a dead certain, you never know, but I was basically like, okay, right, this works. I can see that this will fit here, there, and so on. And so I think, and able to tweak things. So I think it would work. I definitely think the experience of seeing it from the other side helped. I also think that having my day job in the music industry also really helps manage expectations as well. Like, so I'm overwhelmed with the response and like the amount of press and opportunities, like gigs we've got out of this. It's been way more than I ever imagined it would be. But also I understand what everyone's doing, what their jobs are, and to not so I can be as helpful as possible to help make things happen. Or if there's something that needs to be pushed through, like I can help out. I can get involved in that side of things. And I think doing my day job has definitely put us to a big advantage. Well, I think, for a start, the label that signed us, like it's a label that I work with as well. So the door was open, and obviously they had to like the record. Like they wouldn't put it out as a favor, but it was like lots of bands are like, okay, well, we've got a band, this is really great, who do we talk to? And you don't know anyone, but I guess through being in the industry for about 12 years now, I've got to know a lot of people, which has absolutely helped.
Out of curiosity, how did you get into the side of publicity promotion? How did you get into that?
We're going back a good while now. My first PR job I ever did was in 2008. So actually, no, it's 14 years now, isn't it? Bloody hell. Getting older by the minute. I had a day job working for a company called Gorkana, who, you wouldn't have thought you'd know them unless you work in PR, but they're basically like a PR intelligence service where they provide data and information, analytics, and basically tools for PR. And I kind of fell into that job because I needed a job, and I was there for a good few years, and I was in early days of Tesseract at the time, and I remember just thinking, well, I'm learning a lot about PR here, and I've realized that if I want to be in a band, I'm not going to be able to hold down a standard 9-to-5 job where I've got to be in an office 5 days a week. Maybe I should try and get in the music industry. And Barley Phillips, who ran Basic Records at the time, he's now Nuclear Blast. But he ran a label called Basic, who were quite. They played a big role in the early sort of tech metal and sort of gent scene in Europe. He came to see us, see Tesseract, who was interested in signing us, and I basically pitched him and said, "Do you need any help with any PR? I'll do it for free." and so he said, "Okay, I've got this band. I've got these bands. See what you can do." And so I just basically went for it and made it up as I went along. Didn't really know what I was doing, but we got some results. And I think it was also a stroke of luck, because around about that time was when this whole thing was kind of new. Those bands like the Arusha Accord, Fell Silent, which was Ackle's old band. Well, Fell Silent turned into, I guess, Tesseract, Monuments, and Heart of a Coward, who were all kind of... and then who else? I can't remember now. It was ages ago. A band called No Made Sense. But this is a long time ago. But they were all... because it was a hot new scene, the press was super interested in it, so the doors opened really quickly. So I mean, it's a stroke of luck, to be honest, that I managed to get in it that quickly. And then from there, basically Barley and I started a PR company, which was to become Hold Tight, actually, but I think it was called Invictus PR at the time. And we started working with Sumerian, because we knew Sumerian because they distributed Basic Record stuff. And then I started building up clients at an early stage. And then in 2010, we launched Hold Tight, and basically have been growing it since then.
What, because, you're saying at that point that you started back in 2008, and, thinking back myself a few years before that, graduating high school in 2002, we were at the infancy kind of the internet kind of being readily available to everybody. It was kind of obviously bridging like land masses and so forth. Like, we could contact and be in communication with people across, different continents and so forth. So, you look 6 years later, 2008, you kind of have the boom of the beginnings of various social medias of, MySpace, probably a lot of those kind of avenues for bands to get their music out beyond where they can probably even play. So what is it like kind of at that point of the infancy of the internet, and kind of probably being someone who's learning to utilize that for your publicity company to kind of grow and adapt with technology while also probably doing the exact same thing as a musician?
Well, yeah, it's kind of crazy if you think back to how different things were back then. I remember, we used to send out physical packs for everything. We'd have addresses, you'd send CDs with printed one sheets. And then, like the idea of doing that now, God, it was a massive load of work. It was horrible. So I remember it was constantly like, packing things, posting them, and then following up on emails. So I guess the whole kind of following up on emails principle hasn't changed. That still exists. But nowadays, you've got tools like sort of Horlicks and iPool and all these things which do it all electronically. But to be fair, actually, I think even we're probably still sending out packs up until about 2013, 2014.
Depends on the band, I think.
It also depends on the journalists. There's some now that still really want, not many, but some that do want CDs. Germans quite like CDs in my experience. I think it's amazing to see how things have changed, because like now in Hold Tight, we're not just a PR company. We do like digital marketing and sort of like email marketing, and basically offer like lots of other ways for bands to get their music out there. And as you say, Facebook, I think I joined it in like 2008 or something back then, but it wasn't obviously anything like the powerhouse it was. And it's fascinating to see how all the social media tools have now become, an absolute vital part of everything, and also a massive hindrance and frustration as well. But it's interesting to see how all these things have evolved over the years. It's like, even in the last 2 years, like those platforms are totally different now to what they were then, and it's just a constant evolving kind of game. Also DSPs as well, like the growth of them, like they I remember I did get Spotify quite early on. I remember it. I got it probably around in like the late 2000s, but it wasn't anything. I was still like very much listening to CDs, and I remember like things like LimeWire, where you used to basically like a torrent music, which I obviously don't approve of, but sometimes that was the only way to get hold of music. If you couldn't find a CD somewhere, and you'd torrent it. Obviously that doesn't really exist anymore with DSPs, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm going slightly off track.
No, that's the fun thing of this is, kind of the tangents creating ancillary, talking points. And actually a few, as you were talking, that I kind of thought of, interestingly, so last week the new Pusha T record came out. I don't know if you listen to hip hop at all, but it was interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine, James, that lives here, and he actually works for Horlicks, and we were talking about the new Pusha T record, and I was like, yeah, it's really good. I've been listening to it like this whole week. Even talking about making merch, we're like, should we bootleg some merch? Because like this hook on this one song, because he has a hook where it's like 1-800 call your bluff or call my bluff, and it's just like, dude, that's a fucking shirt. If I ever like, it has to be a shirt. So we're like, oh well, what would we do? Could we print it? And I was like, I used to work for a screen printing place. I still got ties. Like, yeah, we could probably make some bootleg stuff. And then I saw it like a few days ago they released like this hoodie that had it, and I was like, damn, they beat us to it. But it was interesting because when I was listening to the record yesterday on iTunes, the track listing had changed. Like it usually started off with Brambleton, and then now it starts off with track 2. Some of the other songs are moved around, and it's weird. And I was like, I go, what the fuck happened? Like, did you notice that they changed the track listing? And he goes, no. And then he went over to Spotify, and he's like, it's still the same over there as it was. So then, we started this conversation of, are people utilizing the stats maybe from the streamings, the DSPs and so forth, and curating it to make, like, maybe they're finding like, okay, people stop listening here. So if they move this and kind of reorganize the track listing, that potentially it'll allot for more continued listens of the whole album versus just here the tracks we are listening to. But it was interesting as we kind of were talking about that. I go, but now it makes the record feel completely different. And that's something I kind of advocate for, especially with older records, is putting it on shuffle and seeing what the album will reveal to you in a different way, in a different track listing. Because maybe you'll find a song you didn't like, when you pair it with something else, you're like, oh, that song really goes now with this. I really love this song. I hated. So I think it's kind of interesting. Now we're in this interesting territory where albums kind of exist in a live setting, where it's like, just because it exists that way and it was put out this way doesn't mean it may not change at some point, and how it is ordered and makes you listen to it a completely different way and take in the art completely differently.
You're talking about music like it's a fine wine, pairing different tracks. But yeah, I totally agree with that. It makes sense. Where it wouldn't work, though, is if you took a prog record, like maybe one by Tesseract, where it has tracks that all run from one to the next. If you shuffled that up, it would be an absolute nightmare. But but yeah, I totally see what you're saying. And I mean, I guess that's the beauty of the convenience of DSPs and creating playlists and stuff like that. You can like make anything, really, can't you? You're kind of free to play around with tracks in any order, and yeah, see how it feels. Yeah, I get that.
It's funny to kind of think about those kind of things where an album can change, like, especially I'll see it more in rap than obviously I would say metal or whatever, but because sometimes you'll have it, like Kanye was really good at it, where it's like, this album I'm going to change it, maybe a verse will change, maybe I'll add a new feature to it or whatever, and you're like I guess you're just constantly having to go back and figure out, like, okay, what changed? And I think if you are a fan of music like myself, and I would say, you as well, where you want that kind of, it keeps it fresh and interesting in a time where, you feel like it's been pushed to push a single, not a record, but to kind of go back to the love of a full album, getting that full album experience. I think we're kind of getting back to that. And it was funny because, like, I had Dennis DeYoung from Styx on, and he was kind of being the old man, get off my lawn kind of person, where he's like, your generation doesn't listen to full albums. They want singles. They kind of killed the album. And I was like, no. I was like, actually, I think it was your generation. And I go, because your generation started with the 7-inch singles, the 45s. I was like, your generation was the one that you sell a single. If you're an artist, you maybe put out a B-side that then goes to radio potentially, and then you just tour on the one single until the next one comes out, and albums weren't really a thing until the 70s. So I was like, I don't think it's my generation that kind of ruined it. If anything, I think it's going back to where it started. And I go, but I just saw a meme yesterday that was like, when you spent $10 on iTunes store for an album and you're 2 songs in and you realize the whole thing sucks. And it's like, I think we as consumers started holding artists accountable for not putting out shit and then paying full price for it.
I think the whole single thing is quite interesting. I feel like with rock and metal in particular, you see lots of bands try, like, oh, I'm going to put out loads of singles for ages and kind of copy that pop strategy, because it's a very pop thing to do. So I think it's like, like the single strategy really works with fair weather listeners, people who don't, they like music but they're not passionate, they don't love music. They'll put on like daytime radio and that'll satisfy them. And so so if it's a pop act that's targeted that market, they put out one song, they love that song, they put out another song, they love that song. Whereas I think like actual fans of music, rather than fair weather fans, they want more. They like a body of work. They're like, oh, I like that song, I want to hear what's next, rather than I like that song, I'll listen to that over and over again. And I don't think the album format, and I don't know, lots of people probably disagree with me, but I don't think the album format as in a body of work will ever go away, because I think the music fans will always want something to get stuck into. I think what will change is like the tradition of it being a certain length. Like because albums were limited by how much you could fit on a record back in the day, or a CD. But nowadays, like with digital, it makes no difference. You could have a 3-hour album, or if only 15 minutes works, it could be a 15-minute body of work. But I don't think albums will die. One problem actually is like with music that doesn't fit album kind of parameters is in traditional PR. Actually, it's quite funny. It's like magazines don't really know what to do with a band. If a band puts out an album, they're like, oh yeah, we can review the album, oh, we've got lots to talk about with the album, so we can do a feature and so on. But when bands just drop singles, lots of the more traditional media are a bit like, well, okay, we'll post the video, what else are we going to do? And it's actually a bit tougher. I don't know, I think it's a weird one.
Well, I think what's been interesting to me about doing that, I've been talking more about this concept that I've been working my way through, and I just love talking to the guests I have on about it and kind of getting their take on it. But I had this epiphany a while ago where a band puts out a record, we get all excited about it, and I kept noticing the same phrase that was always said, yeah, but I'm really excited about the stuff we're working on now. And then when I kind of started thinking about it, I was like, the life of a musician or an artist is such an interesting one, because by the time we as the fans are hearing it, you potentially have already been living with those songs for a year, 2, potentially, by the time it comes out and we're hearing it. So while you as a creative are already creating something new now that you're excited about, you're having to then go back in the past and kind of relive something that you've probably already worked through, and you're already like, yeah, I'm done with that, and I want to go on to this next thing. So you're never really, you're in the present, you're also in the past, and you're kind of somewhere in the future as well. And you're in this myriad of all of it. And to kind of realize that you have to exist compartmentally like that, I think is really interesting. And I think that's where the idea of putting out singles and or at least maybe EPs every so often kind of would bridge that gap a little bit. So potentially if a band puts out a record and you're like, where the fuck did this song or this sound come from? It's like, well, if I would have been able to get you this when I first started, you kind of would have seen it kind of happening in real time. But unfortunately you're playing catch up, and now it seems drastic. It seems very weird. It's really not, if you could kind of exist in the time frame that I actually made these. And to me, I think that's where I think singles and EPs would actually benefit a band that wants to be a bit more experimental with their sound over time.
Yeah, I guess ultimately, if you wanted to put things out that you feel is current within your own kind of creative process, that makes sense. But I don't know. I think this is the music industry person in me talking, is that I kind of believe that you got to separate those things, and it's like, it doesn't really matter what the artist is doing now. What's public facing is what we need to be talking about, and the artist has to kind of get their head into that position. I mean, some find it really easy, some don't. But yeah, I don't know. I guess different artists have different levels of ability to manage that side of things, and yeah, it's a funny one. I think also with singles, the obsession with it at the moment is getting DSP playlisting as well, like, because getting your such tracks playlisted on Spotify and Apple Music and so on is a really big part of your exposure and also your revenue, because the more streams you get, the more you get paid, albeit not very much, but so lots of bands, and quite a few bands we've worked with, have dropped like like 3/4 of their album before they release it, just doing single, 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 single. Oh, and here's the album at the end with 3 songs you haven't heard, which does work, and it helps you get your numbers right up on the streaming services.
Well, it's almost, and I don't know if this is one medium following the other or one informing the other, but I know, like, so having done this podcast for like 5 years, and it's like, in the grand scheme of things, I'm still kind of like late to the game, quote unquote, because like the people I've been listening to have been doing it for 12, 15 years, like really the originators of doing the medium. But in doing this, like, I feel like there are still people who are like, oh, podcasts, I don't really know what those are. And so it's interesting to kind of feel like I'm coming in at the tail end of something, but still seemingly talking to people who I guess aren't as into it, where it feels like it's still kind of in its infancy of where it can be or where it goes. But I know from doing a weekly show, it gets kind of a bit frustrating at times where you're like, all right, this episode drops and this episode drops, and you're just like constantly like on to the next thing. That I've always said, if I were to do a show, another one, I probably would do it as a season, because then you can kind of cheat the stats a little bit, where it's like, if you have a 10 episode season, but 400 people subscribe or whatever, boom, your numbers just shoot. And that's how you climb up onto the iTunes charts for podcasts. So it's kind of a way to do all the work and then kind of get to sit back and not have to create something consistently, like doing a weekly show or whatever. But also getting your numbers where they need to be to be more impactful. And I feel like, as I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of how albums get rolled out now, where it's like, here's this single here, like you said, like 4 singles or 5 singles, and then you get like the last 3 or 4 that you didn't hear. Because I remember when it was just like, you might have a promotional single and then the lead off single, and then that was it, and then you're buying the record or you're not. And I feel like there's no sense of mystery about a record anymore, because I feel like you're giving it away. But having done this podcast, I feel like you said, I feel like it is a way where either people have seen what podcasts were doing, where they're releasing seasons, and it's like, maybe that's a way, if we drop single, we push the numbers drive up, and then it, creates more buzz or whatever for bands, because now everything's about your numbers. What are your social numbers? What did your last video do? What are your streams? All these kind of things. So I wonder if potentially podcasts have piggybacked off of bands doing singles, or if someone along the way kind of realized that people who were dropping seasons of podcasts were kind of shooting up the charts and getting numbers that way. If someone like yourself, talking about analytics and data, if someone saw that and goes, what if we apply that same formula to bands and drop singles, so then we kind of push all of the numbers up?
Yeah, I mean, it's all essentially the same kind of thing, isn't it? It's all basically trying to market audio to people, just different kinds of things. And I'm sure they definitely borrow from each other. But you said something that just kind of struck a nerve with me there, like the mystery thing. And it's actually quite sad that doesn't exist, because I remember when I was a kid, like, your favorite band's new albums out, you go down to the record shop and you hadn't heard anything, because especially like metal isn't on the radio in the UK at all. Like, you had like Headbangers Ball, which is a metal TV show at 1 a.m. once, like once a week. And there's another one called Noisy Mothers, which was on occasionally. But that was literally the only place to hear heavy metal, or to watch Beavis and Butthead and you see like little snippets of metal. And so you'd never really heard singles before they came out. So, like, for example, like when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with Demanufacture, and I remember the excitement by Fear Factory.
Yep.
And then I remember the excitement of when Obsolete was coming out. I remember, going to the record store that morning, bought it. I probably had my Discman with me, if you remember those. And it's like straight on, yeah, great. And I heard nothing, so I didn't know what to expect. I listened to it from start to finish and over again, because it's so exciting. And yeah, that's completely gone forever, I think. But
well, it makes me wonder, because like, as you were just talking about, getting demanufacture and obsolete and stuff like that, and being able to remember the excitement of getting, like, the tangible thing of getting it, and then opening up, looking at the CD booklets and all those kind of things. I wonder, and I feel like, I wonder if people are going to have the connections with music. Like, so that was my conversation with James, again, of Tesseract and Cage Fight. Hopefully you have checked out that Cage Fight record. It is probably one of my top album of the year contenders already. It wasn't much of a surprise when I heard it, but it like I said, it's just so fun. It's a fun listen. And I think that's kind of the other thing that I sometimes miss about, heavier music or hardcore or whatever, is that sometimes I feel like it's not fun. It's just like, it's serious. And I'm not saying that this isn't, but it's just, I don't know. It's just a feeling you get, I guess, where you're like excited about it. Puts a smile on your face. And, yeah, I don't know. I really hope you're digging this record, though. I want to see this band succeed because I want it selfishly. I want to see them tour here in the States, and I want to go to this show and go see this band. So selfishly, for me, if you haven't listened to the Cage Fight record, please go listen to it. Because it'll bring hopefully the band here in the States. If you're listening to this show here in the States. Also, it's funny. I was actually kind of thinking about that in regards to at the bar I work at. I had to get this long drink in. It's kind of my new go-to. Like instead of it's like the alternative to like a White Claw or whatever, but it's a gin-based kind of drink. And I have been championing to get it at our bar for like the last couple of months. And we finally got it in this weekend, and I've been enjoying it, and other people have been enjoying it and enjoy trying it. But I had to drink basically almost a full fifth of the Jaeger cold brew. So over the course of probably about a month or so of my shifts and getting that as my shifty and all that kind of stuff, I laid that down to get what I wanted. So I was kind of thinking about that as I was saying, like, hey, if you guys all listen to Cage Fight for me, maybe, selfishly I'll get it, in the band here. So going to start wrapping up this episode. I'm going to try something different. If you want to follow James or Tesseract or Cage Fight, literally everything is in the show notes. Just look in the show notes. I put them there for a reason, and I realize I waste time going through on here to say something that you literally can read. So it's literally in the show notes of the podcast you're listening to, so just do that. Or Google his name, or the band's name, either way. And for the podcast, if you would like to keep up with us, it's simple enough. Go to BrewSpeakPod on all your socials. We are there. Pretty much going to be the only thing that should pop up. There's a reason I did that. And our sponsors, you know what? Also in the show notes. You heard them at the beginning of the episode. I don't need to run through them again. They're there. Rockabilia, On Point Pomade, and Bean Bastard. You know about them. And for the BREWtally Speaking podcast, I am John. I will talk to you all next weekend. Hope you're enjoying your holiday weekend. And we will return next week with Jay Bat. That was a fun chat, and it's really fun how it actually came about. But I'm not going to spoil any surprises with it. Enjoy your weekend. Talk to you next week.